Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome, one and all, to the Defiant Takes Football Primetime Preview Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at TheMaxDean, and I'm back with Kyron Samuels at Kyron Samuels on Twitter. So we're here to talk about the two Monday night games coming up on the doubleheader, and we're also going to briefly talk about Patrick Mahomes' new contract before we get started there. Kyron, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, man. Another good week of football, so I'm always excited when there's some good games to talk about, and a lot of that happens. Even if the games weren't like crazy last-second finishes like there were last week, I think there's some huge implications already, and you're starting to see things unfold already, even though it's only week 2.
Yeah, man. It was a good weekend of football for sure. Where there are more good games to talk about than we'll have time to talk about later tonight when we do our weekly recap. So, that's a good sign. Now, the first thing that we're going to jump into today is the Patrick Mahomes contract. So, new 4-year deal, 4 years, $210.6 million. Now, I don't know all of the logistics yet because this is pretty new, right? I don't have every single detail laid out right in front of me. So I'm not sure if the deal has more years beyond that, and this is just the way that it's being reported, or if it's really just a 4-year deal now. It doesn't really make sense that it's only 4 years because there was also this caveat that they'll revisit it after the 2026 season, which means that if they're waiting that long, there's got to be more years. Otherwise, he'd be a free agent at that point. So that doesn't really track. But regardless, the presentation is that he's earning substantially more over the next 4 years. As far as his contract before, it was a really interesting one because it was so long and he signed it so early. So after playing for 3 years, he was eligible for an extension and he signed a record-setting deal that was 10 additional years, but he still had 1 year from his initial contract plus an option year remaining. So he was under contract for 12 years. And now this new contract comes in only 3 years afterwards, meaning that he's only actually played 1 year on the extension itself that he signed back in 2020, because the past 2 years before that were still under contract years. So this is one of the more murky contract situations in the NFL, I think. And the way that his deal was set up before was that the first 5 years averaged, I forget what it was, but it was something like 39 million, 38 or 39 million, which put him at number 1 in the league back then, but just barely. And then the second 10 years was 50-ish, which brought it up to about an average of 45 million, which is what it was reported as. And so the fact that they have gone back and redone this deal is kind of interesting because one of the reasons that they did the deal for the length that it was that it gave them a lot of time with him at a very good value. So in the reality, the team has kind of set themselves back just a little bit by revamping this deal so early in his tenure, because they only really got the benefit of having him at that low number for about 1 year when you really think about it in practical terms. So I know that I'm a little bit more invested in the contract side of things when as far as the dynamic between you and I go, but does anything jump out at you about this signing? I mean, what are your thoughts on them giving Mahomes more money so early?
I don't have too many thoughts about it. I think if you think about it from like the organizational standpoint, that maybe you can have the same kind of viewpoint that you have. Maybe you would have liked to keep it at that low value for that amount of time. But when you see all the other contracts that have been out there, when you see Burrow's making, I believe, $55 million a year, Lamar's right behind him is something around 51 or 52 a year. Herbert's 52 and a half, I believe, somewhere around there. Everybody's making way more than 45 now. The contract was turning out; it was starting to teeter on like laughable territory, especially for the production that Mahomes has given you. So I think it was more of just appeasing your best player. Yes, it probably wasn't the most advantageous if we're talking about cap wise and being able to maneuver around, but I think they positioned them well over the last themselves well over the last 2 or 3 years with just freeing up a little bit of money. They don't have a ton of terrible contracts on the books like some of these other teams. They don't have a lot of long term high value contracts. I think they can afford to do this. And that's part of the reason why Chris Jones was holding out so much. Is like not only were they not paying him what he was worth, they could pay him what he's worth. They just didn't. And this might have been the reason why. This is not something that happens overnight. This is not something
Right.
that happens during the first 2 weeks of the season. This has been in the talks for a very, very long time. So that's the only thing that I would be, a little bit concerned about is how the rest of the guys are going to take this. I mean, he was already the highest paid player, on the team, but then you have Chris Jones who gets not a peanuts contract. I don't want to be, dense here, but gets a contract that is far under what he's worth. Travis Kelce has been talking about, a rework contract because he's like the third or fourth highest paid tight end right now. It might even be less than that. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he's not the highest paid tight end in the NFL, and you can just consider that a great value for the franchise in and of itself. And not to mention some of these offensive line contracts that they're going to have to pay in the next two or after this season. Trey Smith's going to be up. Creed Humper's going to be up. They're all in their third seasons. So after this third year, you're going to have to re-up a lot of these guys on the offensive line, and you've already invested. I believe it is $60 million in the tackles that you brought in this year. So maybe there's a little bit of reworking the situation, just timing the quarterback, making him happy, and then you're going to figure out the rest of everything. So I'm not going to think about it too deep there. But the only concern I would have is like what the dynamic is like in the locker room now. Because he was already high paid, and I think everybody's going to probably agree that Patrick Mahomes deserves whatever they're going to give him. He's playing like the best quarterback in the NFL. He has 2 Super Bowls, 2 MVPs. You want to appease that guy. You want to make that guy happy, because if there's ever a situation to where a player has leverage in a holdout type of situation, because all right, I'm not playing on the contract anymore because it's not worth it, it'll be a Patrick Mahomes type guy, and I don't think he's ever the guy that would like probably do that, which is why this guy worked out behind the scenes, and we're here already. But you don't want to end up in that situation if you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you can afford to go ahead and fix it and figure it out. How old is Patrick Mahomes? 27. Like, they're going to be doing this every 3. It's just from a Patrick Mahomes standpoint, it makes 0 sense to not be in this position every 3 or 4 years. Rework the deal, get as much as you can get because you're the best player in football. You're playing at the most high value position in the NFL that you can exercise these, move your muscle a little bit and demand these things. And as long as you're producing and playing at the MVP level on the field, teams are pretty much just they're going to have to oblige you. So I don't think I'm going to read too deep into the freshness of the deal and how you said it's only 1 year into that extension because of who he is and what he's done, and you have to protect that guy.
Yeah, it ultimately does make sense in that. So, like I said, you can look at a 10-year long contract and say the average is $45 million, but from an actual earnings standpoint, it really wasn't that, because you look at a smaller total contract, you can average out those years and you're probably getting close to the same thing, right? Like a 3 to 4 year contract, you're probably making relatively close to what the average is year to year. But when you have such a long contract, it's almost like 2 NFL contracts stacked on top of each other, because we rarely see anything more than 5 years. The average is closer to 4 for big time players, and for less than that, it's 2 or 3, and sometimes for a lot of guys 1. But what that meant is that from an actual earnings standpoint year to year, if he was making $39 million right now, not only was he dwarfed at the $45 million range by Watson, Murray, Wilson, Hurts, Jackson, Herbert, Burrow, on top of that, you also had guys like Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, and Dak Prescott and Daniel Jones all making more than him from a practical standpoint. So as nice as it would have been to keep that contract going for a while longer, the rate at which the quarterback contracts have spiked, it really only made sense to add more money to that. Now, I wonder if the actual number of years has stayed the same, but they just moved money forwards because, again, like I said, it doesn't make sense to wait till after 2026 to revisit it. But even still, he still comes in slightly under Joe Burrow and slightly right around Herbert as it is, just based on this initial reporting. So it's just an interesting situation that I like to continue to monitor, and we'll talk more contracts as things come up. But I guess this is the first one we've really gotten a chance to dive into for this season. So let's carry the conversation into Monday Night Football. So we have the Saints being favored -3.5 going into Carolina. They are relatively healthy in terms of players who are not already on IR or suspended, with running back Kendre Miller and safety JT Gray both questionable. So their full assortment of players at their disposal, which is kind of unique because they always seem to have an injury report that's like 10 players long. And then the Panthers are questionable with wide receiver DJ Chark, and that's the only player listed for them. So I'll let you take the floor here first as we talk about the matchup. NFC South is a tight race for pretty much every team involved. The Panthers are probably the farthest behind, but what do you think this matchup looks like in terms of the division going forward?
Well, I like this matchup a lot because I think it's two of the better defenses in the National Football League. Just typical NFC South football. You're gonna have some really good defenses and some offenses that struggle a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you can score 20 points, you're probably gonna be in a great position to win a lot of these ball games in this division. So I love both of the pass rushers on these teams. You have guys like Cam Jordan. Then on the other side, you got Brian Burns, and then another guy that I'm super excited that I'm glad a lot of people get to see him tonight is Frankie Louvu. So watch out for Frankie Louvu on the Carolina Panthers, one of the more dynamic players. And talk about versatility, getting after the pass as a pass rusher, covering people in the flats, making open field tackles. Just his pass rush repertoire. He's just very good. They're going to bring him on some blitzes from depth as well. You get to see a little bit of his speed and athleticism. So I'm really excited about this matchup because I just love the defense so much. I'm looking for whoever to play turnover-free football on offense is probably going to have the best chance to win this football game. And I feel like that's pretty much the case for any football game. But when you really look at these teams, with the defense they have, like I said, 20 points should be enough to win. If you play turnover-free football, and if your defense is playing to their level, they're going to force one or two. I think that'll be the team that wins. And I think that'll probably be the Saints. I think Bryce Young is still really good for me. In this first game against the Falcons, he looked pretty solid. Had a couple interceptions and on the same exact type of play. He didn't hold the safety over. He didn't hold the safety over. He's looking at him, and it's kind of like college habits. Like you're just good enough, and those guys aren't fast enough or smart enough to realize what's going on. You can fit it in. So he's not holding the safety long enough in that look, but he's poised, man. Like I see a lot of guys that throw an interception and they go into the same. These even older guys, they throw interception and they're like, oh man, they're throwing the helmet down and they're crying about it. Like, no, he came back and he finished out the game actually pretty well every time he threw. Well, those 2 times he threw interceptions, he responded very well. And I'm interested to see how the offensive line holds up because they are. I won't say they're bad, but they're just hit or miss. Like one game you see them and they look like they're one of the better units in the NFL. Then the next game they come out and he's getting clobbered in the preseason game by the Jets backup D line and he gets knocked out. I believe he took 8 dropbacks and he got smacked on like 5 of them. So you don't know which offensive line you're going to get. But like I said, I think the kid he's so solid between the ears, nothing will phase him. So to help him out, to balance that out, they're going to have a heavy dose of the run game. I don't know who's going to be the separator in the wide receiver room because I don't truly think that they have one. But that's where, as offensive coordinator, you have to come in and scheme some stuff up for your wide receivers, one, and to get your guy in a rhythm, too. So I'm interested to see how their game plan offensively. But I think the Saints, Carr is not the greatest at protecting the ball, but he's been here before. He's a veteran. They have much better receiver options, and they have much better offensive line play consistency-wise, in my opinion. So I would favor the Saints, and I think that they should win this football game. But hey, I mean, plus 3.5. I mean, listen, it's only 3.5 points swing either way. It's not like either team has a huge advantage here.
Yeah, for sure. I look at the roster just matched up across the entirety of the teams, right? Their offense versus defense on both sides. And I kind of go back and forth like, okay, well, they've got this, and okay, well, they've got that, and they've got this, and they've got that. And I feel pretty good about the matchups. I don't feel like there's anywhere that's this distinct disadvantage, except for one place that crops up for me. And we can circle back to the offensive line for the Panthers in a second. But for the Saints, they've got mostly some pretty solid players. Maybe you don't love all of them all the time. But the place where I worry that this game could just really come apart for the Saints offensively, because otherwise I feel like they have the advantage, is Trevor Penning versus Brian Burns. Because Trevor Penning got hurt in preseason last year. He missed the entirety of his rookie year. He came out and last week was rough on him. And Burns is singularly better on the edge than anybody that the Titans have. And Harold
Yeah.
Landry's a good pass rusher, but he's still kind of getting back. Burns is really top level elite size, athleticism, bend, everything. He's come into his own. He's probably a top 5 true edge rusher, at least close, if not up there. And Penning had a rough week. So, you can help, you can chip, you can do whatever, but ultimately, I do wonder if that matchup is going to cause a few big plays that swing the momentum of this. So, just from your offensive line eye, are you worried about Penning in his ability to block up the edge against an elite pass rusher?
Like yes and no. Obviously, Brian Burns is one of the better guys in the NFL, like you just said. But I think where Trevor does have an advantage, I would say so in these matchups, is that he's just simply more physical player than most of the guys he's ever going to play against. If he's able to be technically efficient enough to where he can use that athleticism, I think he can hold up against pretty much anybody. But that just remains to be seen. We haven't seen it enough consistently. Is he going to be the guy that's going to take his sets properly every time? Have his hands in the right place where he's not getting sideswiped or he's not getting those little jump rip moves or those jump club moves and just being able to exude their athleticism on him. I think if he just settles down and stops trying so hard to exude that physicality and just be nasty with people and use the technique to then translate it to nastiness, I think he'll be fine. I truly do. So that's the step I'm hoping to see him take all through this season, not just tonight. Use your technique, rely on your proficiency, and then translate that into the nastiness that we love you for, because that's what's going to, stop people dead in their tracks. You get a couple reps, and you have, especially for defensive guys that use their athleticism and speed and their just natural ability. If you're patient with them and you don't give them the little advantages to take advantage of that they're counting on you for, because they're not going to run through you, they're not going to necessarily run by you. They're counting on those little details that overstand with your punch, and then I can sideswipe you and get your shoulders turned, and then I can use my athleticism to bend the corner. Like you said, he's very bendy. If you don't give them those little details, you just don't give them those little signs that they can take advantage of, they start to, really get frustrated after a couple of reps. And then they're thinking like, okay, I need to change it up. Maybe I need to go cross face this time. Maybe I need to talk to coach. Maybe we need to run some games on the outside so I can get free. It just slows their operation down and it makes them think a lot more. And I think that's what, we love Joe Thomas, because Joe Thomas wasn't the best athlete to ever play offensive line by far. Trent Williams is one of those guys, but he's not like teach tape to me. He's just freaky athletic and he could do what he wants pretty much. But another guy, Kyron Smith, I don't think he's one of the more freaky athletic guys we've ever seen in the offensive line. But, the Kyron Smith, the Joe Thomas type, they're so calm and patient. They're so relaxed and they're so technically proficient every rep. It frustrates guys because they don't give you those little advantages to take advantage of. And I think that if he could kind of try to emulate that a little bit and not lean so much on that nastiness, I think he can hold up. But like you said, we haven't seen it enough, and I think it'll be a tough go for him tonight. But if he can just limit the penalties, I wouldn't be mad. Hey, you get one penalty, it's Brian Burns. Most people are going to have a couple of reps that they struggle against him. But if this is the situation where he's getting beat 3 or 4 times and he's getting car hurried and hit and sacked, and then we begin to have sort of a problem. I don't know how long you can let that go at left tackle, especially in that division where you're going to have to play Shaquille Barrett from Bucks. You're going to have to play who else am I leaving out here? You Bucks, Panthers.
Falcons don't really have any monster edge guys, but
they don't have any monster. You're right about that. But it's still that division twice. You got to see Shaq Barrett twice. You got to see Brian Burns twice. Who knows who emerges for the Falcons, man? Like the interesting part about it is they did invest such a high draft pick in them. So I feel like we all know those guys get a little bit more leeway than others. But I think he has the ability. But I would be interested to see if he does continue to struggle, how long the leash is with him.
Yeah, well, I think there's no easy answer for that, but the Saints are pushing for the playoffs this year. The team that they've constructed is very much, and maybe they'll find a way to kind of to cut some of the older players on their roster and reinfuse and be back at it relatively competitive next year and then kind of really back in the mix the year after that. But at least the way they're built now, there's no guarantees of anything long term. A lot of the players on the roster are older. And so I think that this is kind of the year for them, especially with the NFC South being open. So um, I, I wonder how long they'll let it go if it's rough, because last week was not great.
Yeah, another
From
thing is that the division isn't very good. The division
Mhm.
isn't great.
That's
So
what I
you're in
mean.
win now mode also, but like you definitely have a chance to win the division if you're just slightly above average. So I do
Hmm.
agree with what you're saying there. Like they're in win now mode for sure, especially with the quarterback contract because the rest of the division has young quarterbacks. They're figuring it out. The Saints are definitely the most built now to win. You're 100% right about that.
Yeah, I mean the most experienced quarterback in the NFC South that's not Derek Carr has started 6 games now, something like that, 6 or 7 games, including this week. So he has a significant leg up just in terms of the amount of NFL defense that he's seen, how many seasons, the roller coasters he's been a part of. So, um, I think he's a fairly mature player. So just that alone helps you. But then everything else that they've got a defense with a lot of older, experienced players: Marshawn Lattimore, Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu, um, Demario Davis, Cam Jordan. Like all these guys are over 30, and then even Marshawn. Maybe I said Marshawn Lattimore already, but he's not over 30, but he's been in the league for quite a while now too. So it's
Yeah.
just like they're built to not have as many growing pains and mistakes as the other teams. But on the other side of the offensive line, the Panthers, we saw them struggling in the preseason, which was it's surprising in the sense that I thought that they were making strides at the end of last year, so I didn't expect as much regression. But at the same time, it is a fair number of young players. They are learning a new system, right? It's pretty different what they're
Yeah.
doing. Um,
The
they're
number
doing
one
now than
rush
they were
team in the
doing.
league last year. So it's like
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
180 for what they were doing last year.
Hmm.
So much more run heavy last year, and they were efficient at it. So probably I hope we see them lean back into the run game a lot today because for one, you have a rookie quarterback, and two, is what your strength is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you, and I think the more times that you drop into true pass sets, the probably the worse off you'll be ultimately at the end of the game. Sometimes playing conservatively is not a bad thing. Sometimes you do have to look at the season at large and not stress about, you know, if you're less explosive than other teams. But yeah, so we'll see. I mean, I think that last week was a market improvement over the way they were in the preseason, even if there were still moments. So just looking for continued growth there. Look for Bryce Young to not make the same mistakes. I find it hard to really see them winning if both teams play a clean game as far as turnovers, right? Like if we imagine that there are 0 turnovers, which obviously is never going to happen in the NFL, but if we imagine that neither team is making those kinds of mistakes, then I find it hard to see them beating the Saints, but we'll see. So when we look at the actual spread here, we'll close it out on this for the first game. Do you see the Panthers covering a 3.5 point spread at home, or do you think that the Saints ultimately will have a larger victory than that?
I think the Saints ultimately have a larger victory than that. I think, and I'm not saying by anything crazy. I'm saying like very slim margins, like 24-17, 21-17 type of battle, just barely enough to cover it. I think this is going to be a close game because both defenses are so good, and it's hard to go into teams' home field and win. So who knows? But if I was a bet man, I would definitely expect them to um, be a little bit better than the spread suggests. So I'm going to say 21-17, 24-17 type of battle. Saints win and Saints cover.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. I think the Saints cover. I think there's a very real chance that we don't see a lot of scoring from the Panthers offense. But you said it yourself, Derek Carr is not always the most protective with the football, and he'll put one out there to get picked off, certainly on a pretty regular basis. But then you throw in the pressure that might be coming in off of his left side. That's where I see potential issues. I would not be even remotely surprised if we get a sack fumble from Brian Burns, because I think he's going to be there fast enough at least once to get a real hit on him, and he's got that length that he can get the ball. I can't remember. He definitely had a sack last week. I can't remember if he forced a fumble as well. I think he even might have. But yeah, so I'll go with you, Saints to cover their favored spread there. All right, so that takes us into two teams that are still has a young quarterback, but I think both teams, I think at least mentally, are a little bit more on the track of we want to win this year. Now, one got shellacked at home by a very, very good team last week, and the other one surprised a lot of people and pulled out a divisional win. So I never really want to count the Steelers out, and it looks like Vegas feels the same way because based on performance last week, the Browns clearly looked better, right? And I know this is in their home stadium now for the Steelers, but this is a benefit of the doubt thing for the Steelers. There's really no two ways of looking at it because from start to finish, the Browns did look better. So when you look at this matchup, what is it that jumps out to you as far as, I guess I'll just leave it open-ended for you. So what stands out to you?
Well, I don't know if I agree with the fact that uh, on paper this game is tilted towards any one team because of the matchups. I think last week when you look at the San Francisco 49ers, there's maybe two teams in the entire NFL that match up well with those guys. And that's the Chiefs. Well, I'll say three because the Cowboys are playing. Cowboys, Eagles, and the Chiefs. Everybody else is going to have an extremely tough time matching up with those guys and what they present offensively and defensively with the personnel, the multiplicity, and the depth that they have. There's only a couple teams that I think truly can match up with those guys. And if you're unable to score points in bunches, probably won't be able to keep up with them. But everybody else, I think the Steelers defense and the Steelers, some of their offensive weapons are going to be a matchup problem. Like, for example, the Browns offensive line has been one of the best two or three offensive lines the last 5 years. But I think that window is closing. They're very much banged up on that side of the ball. Jed Wills, I think, is a solid, above average tackle, good player, but he'll give you a rep or two where a guy like a J.J. Watt or a Highsmith or a Nick Herbig off the bench can take advantage of. On the opposite end of that offensive line, the starter goes down, and you have a rookie tonight playing in Dawan Jones out of Ohio State. Massive guy. We did a breakdown on him. Go check that out. But 6'8", 375 pounds. I think he's very good. He had a very good showing last week against the Bengals, coming in to replace, I believe, I can't remember who was off the top of my head. I'm drawing a blank right now for some reason. Conklin, all right. We know Conklin. So he comes in to replace Conklin in the rain against, TJ Henderson, Sam Hubbard, some very good pass rushers. And he holds his own and does very well. The problem with a guy like Dawan is he'll give you 30 good reps, and then that one rep he'll get lazy with the stance or he'll over pursue. And with the guy like TJ Watt and Highsmith and those guys, that could be the difference in a sack strip. Like, let's say, for example, last week, if I keep saying JJ because I'm just so used to Watt brain. If Watt doesn't play for the Steelers last week, it's probably like a 45-0 ball game. But he got 2 sack strips. He got, I believe it was 2.5 tackles for loss. He made so many plays in that game to keep them in that game. With the team of a less caliber, because the Browns are not the 49ers. I think they're very good. They're much improved, but they're not the 49ers. I think you'll see those type of plays tonight, and those might be enough for them to win a football game like this. If Kenny Pickett's even halfway decent, if he just plays average football, if Najee and Warren are able to be halfway efficient running the football, I think it's going to be a much closer game. I think the line is probably accurate, especially when you consider the division aspect of the game. It's a rivalry game. It's a night game at Heinz Field, or whatever it's called now, but it's always going to be Heinz Field to me. And I think it's much, much different than what we saw from the first week. And I didn't really take too much from the first week of the season for anybody, really. But I think we're starting to see a lot of teams settle in, and I think we'll see more of the identity of both teams tonight. We'll see if the Browns are actually for real, if they've made strides, if they've actually improved. And we'll see if the Steelers are about where we thought they were, which is a 500 level ball club with the potential to be 10-7 type, or potential to be 6-11 type. So we'll see which one of those teams present themselves tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I'm first of all, TJ Watt is incredible, and so the matchup between Dawan Jones and he is gonna swing in Watt's favor, even if Jones very genuinely dwarfs him by well over 100 pounds. Like, that's not even an exaggeration. It's wild. But I think just from a speed standpoint, Watt is got him, and additionally, he's just so savvy, and he's so smart that there's going to be a number of plays where he does get him. But the thing that I think about is that, that line is very good. And yeah, we've seen some cracks here and there, but without Cam Hayward, I think we're looking at a very different Steelers defense, because while I didn't mention him on the injury report, well, I didn't really mention the injury report, but he was on IR, so he wouldn't even be listed there anyway. So they're missing him against that defensive line. Highsmith is good on one side. TJ Watt's very good on the other side. But I think that without a player like Cam Hayward in the middle, their ability to stop the run is probably pretty significantly diminished. So the number of dropbacks that Deshaun Watson will really have to take and face that pressure from those two outside guys are probably minimal. I mean, if I'm the Browns, if I'm Stefanski, I'm thinking to myself, like, we've got to run this ball. We've got to run the ball and throw screens and just do that as much as humanly possible, because we've got the guys who can actually accomplish that, get it done. We've got the ball carriers, and then, and hope that works, because I don't really want to see my right tackle beaten over and over again. And while I don't expect him to get beat over and over again throughout the entirety of the season, I think it's a uniquely challenging matchup for him, just because of the size difference, the speed difference, and that veteran savvy. I mean, we're talking about the defensive player of the year from 2 years ago, who, is making a case for another go through. So that's where I see a potential issue, and what I would do to go about trying to diffuse that if I were the Browns. And then from the other side, looking at the trenches, the Steelers' offensive line is still kind of a work in progress. They struggled against the 49ers pass rush last week, and now just about anybody might. We talked about how good they are from number 1 to number 7 in terms of their rushers, but the Browns aren't bad themselves, so I'm not sure that it might not still be a little bit of an issue. How do you foresee the Steelers' offensive line holding up to the Browns' rush?
Not very well. Just being honest about it. I think Zadarius Smith is coming in has been a huge addition for them, and not only that, but Dalvin Tomlinson in the middle. They're just so much more deep than they've been in the last 3. I would probably say ever, to be honest. I wasn't around in the 80s or I was young in the 90s and wasn't really football savvy, but it's the best Browns defensive line I've seen in my lifetime. I think they're extremely deep up front. I think they're very deep in the back end. Linebacker's the question for them. If JOK can continue to take steps forward, and I think he's a very good football player, if he can continue to take steps forward and be a little bit more physical, he's very athletic. He makes some crazy plays. You're going to see some freaky athleticism, but if we can see him kind of become more of an enforcer and be the guy, or you know what, let me take that back. That's just like icing on the cake if he's able to do that. If he's able to continue to just progress and be a very good to above average football player, I think that defense is going to be pretty incredible. And I think what Jim Schwartz does great is that he counteracts that. If they're not great pass rushers, he'll dial it up. He's never stagnant, and I think that's something that's been missing in that offense. On that defense. They've been stagnant at points, and you can double team, triple team with the chip Myles Garrett, and then you don't really have anybody else to worry about. You they kind of sat back and they were really very conservative. Schwartz has dialed it up for them, man. You saw it in the preseason. Listen, this fourth quarter of a preseason game, and he's dialed up 6-7 man pressures, and I'm like, that's the identity of that defense now. And then you saw a lot of that week 1. I think you're going to see a lot more of it tonight because of the struggles up front with the Steelers. They're very young. The veterans aren't very great. They're not great at establishing a run. I think, Najee, I think he's a very, very good running back, but he has to get 20, 25 carries for them to be semi-productive in the running game, because I believe the stat was going into the season that he was hit at or behind the line of scrimmage in 40% of his touches through his first 2 seasons, which is absolutely insane. So if you're getting hit in the backfield on 40% of your touches and you're still running for 1,000 yards, one, that tells you how inefficient the offense is, and 2, it tells you how bad the offensive line is struggling. So I don't foresee that changing tonight. Hopefully I'm wrong, because I do like a lot of their young guys, and I like Isaac Seumalo. They got him from the Eagles. We did a breakdown on him as well. We did a breakdown on Broderick Jones, who's a rookie out of Georgia, who I think is going to play tonight.
You think he is going to play tonight?
I would think so, because you can't leave.
I was about to ask you about that next. So
yeah, listen. What do you have to lose at this point? Dan Moore isn't playing much better. The guys in front of him aren't playing well. you have this investment in this high draft pick. The only argument I can see is that you don't want to hurt the kid's confidence if he does get in there and struggle. Some people never recover from those type of beatings, so that is something that you do have to take into consideration. But if that kid is who I think he is between the ears, I don't think he's going to struggle with that. I think he's going to get out there and he might get beat a couple times. He's playing some very good guys, and but the Zadarius Smith is not like a crazy speed rusher. I think he'll get more Zadarius Smith than he will get Myles Garrett. Zadarius Smith is a power rusher. He's going to play through you more than he plays around you, which might play to a guy like Broderick's advantages with his long arms and his some of his strength and athleticism. I think you play the guy. I don't think you have much to lose. You drafted him for a reason. The Steelers don't just draft people based off of potential or based off of ability. They draft guys they believe fit the Steeler mentality, fit the Steeler culture. And if you drafted a guy like that, you're not thinking that guy's going to go into the tank if he loses a pass rush rep. And so I think that you have to play the kid, give him a chance, because the stuff in front of it isn't much better. You have to at this point, in my opinion. But I don't make these decisions. I'm not paying the kid millions of dollars, and they're probably thinking 3 or 4 years down the line. So I do understand it from that point, but I will play the kid.
Well, look, some teams just believe, even in this day, that the first round pick most likely shouldn't be playing, right? Just from a developmental standpoint. And I get that. I think the issue is that you trade up, you get him at 14th overall, and then you got a player in Dan Moore who just hasn't been good. He has at really no point in his career has he really been a good tackle. I mean, I'm not trying to be brutal or anything, but he's been an issue on their line for like 2 years now. And this would be the 3rd year. And so it just seems kind of crazy to me that they're not giving him a little bit more run as the starting left tackle. Now, I will be perfectly honest with you. I was busier in the preseason than I was now that we're really getting into the season. And I tried to watch a fair amount of ball. I didn't really watch Broderick Jones. And even though we both liked him as a prospect, I don't really have a direct insight into what he looked like leading up to week 1. Do you have anything there? Do you see why they kept him on the bench, or do you think it's more of just an overall organizational mentality than anything?
A little bit of both. I mean, he did well run blocking, actually. I think, if any Steeler fans watching, follow Nick Farbaugh on Twitter. He's, I believe it's Nick Farbaugh FB is his app, but he covers them very well. And, we follow each other on Twitter, so we interact a little bit. And he covered Broderick Jones extensively during the preseason. He said that, hey, there was highs and there was lows. He was a little bit inconsistent. And when you're a little bit inconsistent, think about who's going against in practice. For one, he's going up against arguably the best pass rushers in the National Football League. If we're talking about a unit, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Philadelphia Eagles, 49ers, he's playing one of the 3 to 5 best pass rushers in practice every day. So I would imagine he struggled a little bit, but he looked pretty decent in the preseason games. And if you compare that with with what's in front of him, listen, that's probably more of an organizational thing than anything. But I think we'll see the guy play, especially as the season goes on, and especially if they're not very good. If this turns out to be the first losing season, which, I mean, listen, I can't fathom. I would never bet against Mike Tomlin. They haven't had a losing season in 17 seasons. But if it gets to the point where they're 2-6 or 1-5, you have absolutely nothing to lose at that point. And I think you have to play him at that point because just the situation around them, and you have to see what you have. So I think that we're probably going to get to that territory. Oh my God, I hate to say that because I just respect Mike Tomlin so much, but the way the roster is constructed, I don't have very much faith in the offense to score points. I believe somebody tweeted it out today. In his 37 games as the offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Matt Canada's offense has not produced over 400 yards one time. One time in that many. I mean, listen, that's almost 3 seasons worth of play there, and you haven't produced over 400 yards one time. We have to start reevaluating things top to bottom here. It may not just be on the personnel at that point. We have to look at the guy calling the plays and the guy who's employing the guy calling the plays. But when you've made it work for so long and you found a way to be above 500 and to squeak in the playoffs, you probably excuse it a little bit. But think about how good the team could be if they weren't handicapped so much offensively.
I agree. We talked about this last week. I think it's tough because you bring in Canada and he was there with Roethlisberger's last year, and then it's like, well, are we really I think they made the playoffs, I think, in the last year with Roethlisberger barely and got beat. I forget exactly how it all went down, but it's like it was just not bad enough to fire Canada, even though a lot of people kind of figured they should restart. But the thing is, you got to make the decision then, because the last thing you want to do is have a coordinator for a rookie season for a quarterback, especially one who's starting, and then immediately turn around and shift him to another offense the year after that. So you got to make that decision then, because you got Pickett year 1 and then Pickett year 2. You want to give him some continuity, as much as possible. I don't really anticipate Canada being there after this year. I think a lot of things would have to change, but it almost, from the moment they decided not to fire him and move on after 2021, it almost was like a foregone conclusion that you want to keep him for at least 2 years and then make a change after that. Now, there's probably arguments to be made either way, but I think it stands to reason that you don't want to saddle your quarterback with learning 2 systems back to back. So we'll see. But yeah,
the question is, if they do that, how long before you have to take a look at the head man? And I don't think that this is going to be. I don't think you ever fire a guy like Mike Tomlin. You let Mike Tomlin coach until he figures it out, because that's how good he is. He hasn't had a losing season in 17 years for a reason. But there's been a lot of talk in Steeler Nation. There's been a lot of talk from pundits. I think they're going to try to cover Mike Tomlin's head if this continues, and I don't think that's fair at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some real activity there as well.
Yeah, well, look, their offense hasn't been good since, really good since 2014, I think. 2013, 2014. It's been functional for a long time. I don't remember a year. No, I could be wrong, but I don't remember a year since then that they've really been really great and dynamic on offense. And I might even go so far back as to say that they haven't really been truly good since Bruce Arians was there on offense. So maybe that's a little bit overly critical, but I think that they do need to get with the times and make a change. And I think Tomlin has enough grace that certainly it's not going to be at the end of this year, but he needs to probably make a substantial move. So let's pick the game before we get started here. It's just about time for kickoff for the first game. You're going to take the Browns to cover 1.5 on the road, or do you think the Steelers surprise tonight?
Yeah, nothing in depth here. Browns cover on the road. I think Browns have a pretty substantial game offensively. I think they win 28-13, 28-17 type ball game. I think Deshaun Watson has a big game, and Nick Chubb goes over Hunter on the ground. So that's what I think will happen tonight.
I'll take the Browns too. I think the stars on the Steelers defense will make a case, certainly, but I think that the Browns are more talented. They're facing a younger, more inexperienced quarterback. They're missing Deontay Johnson. Now they have other weapons too, but it's not going to be easy. And so if we do see Broderick Jones tonight, hopefully he he doesn't have too hard of a time facing off against Highsmith, Herbig, and Watt as his against Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith as his introduction to the NFL. All right, Kyron, appreciate you. We are going to be back after both games. Should be 11:30 Eastern when we anticipate starting, and we will do our full Week 1 recap, looking at quite a few of the best games from Sunday and then both Monday night games as well. We'll see you all very soon.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.